Hey everybody, my name is Aaron. I'd like to welcome you to my channel, Positive by Negative, where we're taking that dark spiritual coal and alchemizing it into shiny bright diamonds that we can use for our personal growth and development in this big crazy world of ours. And today I'd like to talk to you about what can be kind of a divisive subject. I'd like to talk about prayer and meditation, which is something that I kind of came into later in life. I was until my 30s, really, that I started either one of those things. And really, the meditation didn't even come for a few more years after that. But, growing up, I grew up in a pretty much non-spiritual household. Prayers were just something that we kind of did at like Thanksgiving and stuff when the rest of the family was around, and we'd say grace over dinner or whatever like that. But prayer was just never anything that really made it into my daily life or anything until it kind of had to. And prayer has over the years become a very integral part of my life and how I managed to get through the things that I've been through and how I kind of communicate with the universe and kind of get my instruction. And so the thing about prayer and meditation is they're basically two sides of the same coin. Prayer is the active communication, and meditation would be the passive communication. And who are we communicating with? Every one of us has a whole team of spiritual entities and beings that are with us that help us to get through this life. We've got source, God, divine, whatever you want to call him. Got all kinds of angels, spirit guides, and then ancestors of ours that kind of help us along. And then we also have just kind of random beings and spirits that come along for different purposes and stuff to help us out in different parts of life. And so, it's very important that we learn how to have a solid form of communication with that team to work most effectively with it and kind of, find our purpose in life and to facilitate our mission and what we're doing here. And so, I think a lot of people have kind of a prejudice against both of those things. I think a lot of people think that prayer is something that's supposed to be difficult, like, it's supposed to be kind of like, a lot of people do like foxhole prayers, like, when they're really in trouble or something like that. And like, and with meditation, I think a lot of people think it's kind of an esoteric practice and it's sort of unapproachable. And even if they do try it, it's just the vast majority of people tell me, oh, I can't meditate, I can't make my mind quiet down and stuff. And I totally get that, and I understand why both of those subjects have those kind of stigmas about them. But in my experience, it's not quite that difficult. It's not nearly as difficult as we seem to think it is. And so with prayer, the most important thing about prayer is that it be genuine and authentic. Really, that's the biggest thing. Is if we can say a prayer to whomever it is you pray to, you can pray to Jesus, you can pray to Allah, you can pray to the stars, you can pray to the universe, you can pray to, anything, basically. Whatever it is that you use as your higher power, that you see as the power that kind of facilitates your life here, you can pray to. And it doesn't have to be a really formal thing. The first prayer I ever said was absolutely informal. It was, when I finally got to my absolute rock bottom, drinking and drugging, and had absolutely no place to go. I mean, it was the last house on the block. And, I said the first and most honest prayer I ever said in my entire life up to that point was like, I hear you're out there. If you're out there, please help me. And it did, like that's exactly what happened is that, I said that prayer and within a matter of a few hours, really, like, a bunch of stuff started to unfold that got me, up and out of the situation I was in and eventually to a life that I, could have never fathomed. But it all started with that one very honest and authentic and very heartfelt prayer that I was like, I was at the point where I was absolutely willing to just drop my ego and quit trying to run the show and, basically ask for help from the higher power, and it came, and so, I think a lot of people, think that prayer has to be full of thous and these and all that good stuff, and that's not what I've found to be true at all. And in my experience, prayer can be very conversational, and as long as it's genuine and not selfish, I found that it works really well. Clearly, you probably shouldn't pray to win the lottery unless you're going to, you have like genuine intention of being a philanthropist or something like that, or you're putting that money to good use, and not just for your own selfish means and, ego, to feed your ego and stuff. And so, if we can formulate prayers for things in terms of how we can use them for our own growth to be of service or how to directly be of service to other people, I think those are the prayers that are the most effective and get answered the most. When we can get ourselves out of our own little egoic, desires and needs and stuff and really kind of see how we can impact the world around us and be of service to it, that's when the prayers really start to come. And the thing about it is like, if you pray for selfish egoic things, you generally don't get it. But if you pray for those things, those things in the context of being of service, then you get all the good stuff along with it. So, you may as well just, do it. If you kind of do it right the first time, then, you'll get everything that you want. It's just, you kind of have to look outside of yourself as to how to apply that. And so it was with sobriety for me. When I first got sober, I was like, I'm perfectly willing to help other alcoholics and addicts and stuff like that if we can just keep doing this and stuff. And so, I prayed every day to just, be guided to my highest usefulness. And I still pray for that. I still, that's my biggest prayer, is that I be guided to my highest usefulness. And then, my second biggest prayer, and, I think it kind of falls on to the wayside for a lot of people, is praying or is expressing gratitude in prayer. It doesn't always have to be asking. You can always, it's a very gratifying and awesome feeling to pray to the universe or to God or whoever it is and just thank them for all the wonderful, amazing things that you've got in your life. Because really, when you think about it, we all have a pretty amazing life. Even when it's bad, it's still good as far as, in my experience. I've had terrible things happen, but, in the grand scheme of things, it's all been really good. And so I'm very grateful for every moment. And, I never hesitate to tell, the Spirit that. And so that's just my experience with it. I think prayer can be a very approachable, very practical, very just kind of personal communication that you have with your spirit team to either get direction or to, thank them for it. And so, I think that just starting off with simple prayers, maybe in the morning, thank for the day ahead, ask to be guided and directed and, to your highest usefulness. And then at night, thank you for the day that you had, thank you for guiding me to do this. Thank you for putting this person in my life. Thank you for, all the wonderful blessings that you've bestowed upon me that I get to live in. And that's an amazing thing, to really feel gratitude, for all this amazing stuff we have in our life. And so, prayer is fairly simple. And then meditation is the one that seems to get people, I especially in 12-step meetings, I get people tell me all the time, oh, I can't meditate. My mind is blah, 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 and either that or like, every time I've ever tried to fall asleep, or every time I've ever tried to meditate, I fall asleep. And like, so everybody seems to have an excuse as to why they can't meditate. And I think a lot of that is because most people don't really understand what meditation really is. And in my experience, what meditation is that it's separating the two layers of our consciousness. So we've got the big me, which is sort of your like eternal, immortal spirit, soul awareness that, is very quiet and is basically just an observer of everything that happens in life. Then there's the little me. That's our ego. That's our personality. That's basically the mechanism that makes us go forward in life. It's kind of the 3D sort of materialistic version of ourselves. And unfortunately, like from the vast majority of people, and myself included at times, the ego talks so much louder than the big me. And so meditation in a lot of ways is a way to settle into that big me, to that peaceful side of us, and just watch the thoughts and the inclinations go by from the ego. Because we're not our thoughts. We observe our thoughts. The thoughts come from the ego, but our awareness resides at a level that's kind of further back than that, and we actually observe those thoughts. And so meditation helps us develop that spaciousness inside of ourselves to not attach to every thought we have as absolute reality. It gives us the opportunity to see those thoughts go by and not engage with them and be like, okay, well, I thought that. Why would I think that? And to kind of further analyze our life. And really, all it takes is just being willing to either sit. You can do sitting meditation and just be with ourselves and, kind of disconnect from from engaging with all of our thoughts, but it's not about quieting the mind. We don't have to quiet our mind down. What it is learning how to not engage with our mind, to let, just let the thoughts pass, let them go. And I've been sitting in meditation before and had thoughts go by and like, wow, that was nuts. Why would I think that? But be able to objectively observe our thoughts without engaging with them. And so what that takes is a degree of presence. It takes an intent and an intentional effort to be present and not engage with our thoughts. And so we can do meditation pretty much anytime, anywhere. You can be standing in line, somewhere, and if you just let yourself become present and just notice the sights and sounds around you, and without labeling them, mentally, without really kind of attaching any sort of thought or judgment to anything, and just kind of, you can just stand there in line in presence and and have a form of meditation. One of the best meditations in the world is taking a walk. A lot of times when we're stuck for an idea or just need to clear our heads, one of the best things we can do is just go for a walk and, kind of disconnect from our mind and listen to the birds chirp and grasshoppers and listen to the cars go by or whatever. And almost invariably, we'll find that if we do that, the inspiration or the idea comes because we've taken a break from listening to the chatter and the monkey mind that's going on upstairs and just kind of settled into our beingness. And the thing about meditation is that, it's pretty simple, but it just takes consistent effort. If we can sit down and just, quiet our mind for a minute to begin with, that's a great stride. And it doesn't, don't ever have to get to where, you're doing like these multi-hour long meditations or anything. 5-10 minutes a day sometimes is just all you need to just get that break from the storm, the storm in our head, and just be able to step away from it, disengage from it, and then come back to it, a little like refreshed and with a little more spaciousness around our thoughts and our feelings. And so, meditation, I think the issue with it is that it just does take practice. It does take effort. And, like I said, if you can sit down and quiet your mind down, or not quiet your mind down, but just kind of disengage from your mind for even a minute, that's generally a minute more than the vast majority of people do every day. So, if we can just keep up that practice and maybe get 2 minutes at some point, and then 3. It took me forever to be able to sit quietly for 10 minutes. It took me literally a couple of years to get to that point because, I have a very active mind and strong ego that just wanted to think about everything and stuff. But at some point, I guess my ego learned to trust that, we could just kind of quiet down for a little bit and kind of see life as it really is and not through the lens of our thinking mind. And so, and one of the other things that I've heard, people don't, want to meditate is like, well, every time I meditate, I fall asleep. And if you fall asleep, great. You probably need sleep. There's nothing wrong with falling asleep when you actually need sleep, because I don't think nearly enough people get enough of it. So anyway, those are the two things that I think are my daily practice. Of all the things that in my life that I think are the most effective at keeping me kind of safe and sane and in a good headspace, those are it. Asking for help through prayer and listening, to the answer in meditation, or just disengaging from ourselves in meditation and finding that spaciousness in there so those ideas and inspirations can come. And so really, I think neither one of those things need to be a very complicated or esoteric practice. It just takes a little bit of effort and a little bit of consistency, and I think anybody can do either one of them. So anyway, that's all I had for today. Thank you so much for joining me again. If you resonated with this video, awesome. Give me a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And if not, no worries. We can be friends in some other facet of life. I certainly have no monopoly on the truth or technique, for either prayer or meditation. So just do whatever works for you. And, that's awesome. And so I wish everybody another happy 24 hours, and I will see you next time. Thanks.